So good morning, everyone. My name is Namrata, and I'm here with the lovely Anne-Marie, and we're going to be telling you today and discussing SDG 1, no poverty. So to start off the session, we want to first get an overview about SDG 1.
The Sustainable Development Goals were set forth in 2015 by the United Nations and were agreed upon by 193 countries in the world. Overall, the Sustainable Development Goals, or the global goals, are 17 goals. They have 169 targets underneath them, and then there's 232 indicators, which is like a deeper level. When you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, they are built for nations and for governments to work systemically with sustainable development and make everyone, for instance, come out of poverty or be educated well and think about everybody. But they are also very good for businesses and for individuals to see and get an overview of what the issues are in the world and how you can tackle that on your own. So that's what we have an interest in, right? You maybe on the individual level, and I'm very much for the business one. So that's why we're discussing it. And all these 17 goals are highly interconnected. Without one, there's not the other, and many of the problems are so interconnected that you can't really separate them. But it's good that there are 17 goals, because then you can tackle them in different ways. And they are non-binding, which means that any company or any individual can work with them as they wish to, and no one will come after you and say that you haven't done it the correct way or you may not do this. So I think that's also one of the things we're trying to do with this series, that you are allowed to work with the Sustainable Development Goals if you feel that it brings good to the people around you and the society and the environment. Because I have a box here where you can see all of them. The bottom line here is really the basic needs for people. If you know Maslow's theory of needs, then it's having a place to sleep, having a bed, being protected, having access to education, and just overall well-being for a person in their place. So poverty is really the basic of the basics, right? So number one is we should all not be poor, because that allows us to go out and do other good things.
So can you quantify poverty? Because what does poverty mean?
Yes. So when the Sustainable Development Goals were set out, it was quantified that an extremely poor person had less than $1.25 a day. And this is an international dollar, it's called. It's like a thought up dollar that's equal to all people everywhere. So it's not an American dollar or a Hong Kong Chinese dollar. And it's been, just like you said, it's been changed a little bit, so that now extreme poverty is everyone who doesn't earn more than $1.9 per day. This is equal to 7 dirhams. So if you know anyone who does not earn 7 dirhams, these are extremely poor people. And this used to be a bigger problem than it is now. But there are still around 10% of the global population who lives with less than this $1.9 a day. And that's a big amount of people. And usually it's also in regions where this is the same for everybody living there. It's not so that you live next to people who have more money than you. It's a regional issue.
So in no poverty, what kind of indicators come under it?
First target of SDG 1 is to eradicate extreme poverty. So it means that we want to ensure that by 2030, everybody has more than $2 a day to live on. And then, of course, what happens then? Let's say in 2030, if this target is met, then the goal changes, right? Because $2 is still a very low amount of money. So then the target shifts. So it's not a finite goal that when we reach it, we all say hooray and we have a big party and then it's finished. It's still ensuring that we have more and more equality. And when we look at those targets, I'm sure you're going to ask us how we track this.
Yeah.
For instance, I read a very interesting article from World Economic Forum. It says that the 10% of the richest people in the world bring home 52% of the income. So if you imagine the 10% well-paid people, they take more than half of the earnings home. And when you then look at the bottom half of the poorest people, they only together bring home 8% of the total income in a year. And this creates a huge gap, right? That means that the top 10%, they earn around $122 a year on average, while the lowest paid earn less than $4,000. You can see that this is it's a big problem. And it's very hard to see how you live in a world like this, somehow next to each other, with this different means to start your day.
Yeah.
And when we then talk about the interconnectivity, right, it means that when you live for less than $4,000 in a year, you have to, there's many things you don't have access to, like things that we take for granted: internet, education, a proper place to sleep, good food every day, clean water, health, sanitation, access to a doctor when you need one, access to like any sort of information you would need, right?
Yeah.
And that comes back to, these are the basic needs of human beings that they actually have to compromise with every single thing in their day just to survive.
Yeah.
And that is, of course, extreme poverty that should be eradicated as soon as possible.
Right.
When we look at what COVID has then done,
Yeah.
in the last 2 years, around 150 million people have sunk back down below this $1.9 line. And that's a lot of people. And it means that the progress we did has really backtracked in a very fast way. And it also connects with the fact that many of the people who are poor, they don't have a social security system to keep them. So even when they rise up, if they then fall or they're fired or they get sick or someone in the family gets sick and they can't work, then they fall straight back down into this and maybe even below the line where they were before.
So it sounds like a really grim situation, to be honest. And I completely understand the pandemic has further magnified the issue a lot more. So if I look at practicality of the goal, when the goal was being set by the UN, how did the UN expect governments and corporations to, how do they expect them to tackle the goal? Because what we're talking about is bringing equality in the world in a certain sense. Of course, not actual equality, but at least baseline that people have enough to survive. Yeah. So what was the expectation from governments? What was the expectation from corporations?
So just first of all, to me and to many others, the SDGs communicate something that would otherwise not be communicated as well, right? The United Nations have been able to take these big challenges and issues in the world and made them highly easy to understand. We knew that there was a lot of people who were out there and who had a lot less than we did, but now it's been put into numbers and facts and figures, and it can be tracked and it can be measured. And that is the biggest effect of the Sustainable Development Goals, that now we have a common language to talk about the issues, and that we can measure up and down what the positive things are. And that's really the most interesting thing about sustainable development, right? When we have a common language, then you can start to actually work in the same direction and not just like randomly do different things.
So you talk about a common language amongst different nations about these sustainable development goals. Now, a goal like no poverty kind of is more serious in certain countries and not as much in others. I'm from India. I know how much SDG 1 impacts my country. So how is this being reported, and how is this being collected and calibrated back end?
Yeah. Well, it's being reported both on national levels and for companies and for the governments. And as well, it's being reported from many independent organizations around the world who track the progress from their perspective, right? So it can be anything from the World Bank and World Health Organization, World Economic Forum, for instance, and they all track what they see and what their partners bring in with information. So because it's so, like, it's multifaceted, everything to do with these issues, so the more information that comes in from different sides, it really sheds light on what helps, what is overcoming some of these problems, and how are we spending the money, how many people are looking at this issue. And yeah, so the more information from different sides, the more interesting it becomes, right?
Right. So it's an interesting one that you're bringing up about interconnectedness. So I mean, it's been 7 years since the goals have been put in place. What have the learnings been so far with SDG 1? And I understand COVID has taken stuff off track, I get that, but what have been the learnings, and how is that being shaped for the way ahead?
Yeah. So the learnings overall is that because we are tracking it and systemically thinking about change for having less poverty, there's very big progress. Over the past decade, there's only been progress until COVID hit. So COVID has been the first, like, systemic, huge challenge that has just pulled away the cart. Right? But it also means that once we get back on track, and once that there's more stable economies around the world, then we will come back again. But it means that some of the targets will not be met. And I believe that the many different entities that track goal number 1 are not sure that it will be met. They think that in 2030, there will still be around 7% of people who are under the poverty line.
But that's still a lot of achievement, despite not meeting the goal. That's still a lot of achievement, and it's a very important topic that's been brought to the forefront. If you had advice for companies, what would that be?
Yeah, so I believe companies have the means to do a lot of things in their community, and the first best practice would be to create jobs, right? To create jobs that give, for instance, health benefits and ensure that people don't fall out if they lose their job. And you can create jobs in many ways. It doesn't have to be directly in your factory or in your company. It can also be just creating a community where it's possible to have service providers help each other, and maybe giving them a desk to sit and work, or enabling them to use your laboratory or your factory for something. So there's many different ways, and it could also be creating like making internships for young people who want to know, who want to learn a trade. It can be anything in your finance department, marketing department, production and facility. So teach someone a skill, and then they will go and learn themselves, right?
Right.
And companies are doing well at this, but I also think that many companies, for this COVID situation, has pulled back a little bit and has focused, like put the focus back in. And it would be great if they started to look outwards again and give just a few $100 or $1,000 to create initiatives that means that people have a purpose in their day and that create their own money. Right.
Right. No, that's a really interesting point. I mean, from my perspective, I remember the government of India doing a lot of vocational training. In fact, they had a mandate where they would encourage vocational training centers to be set up across the country. And they actually gave subsidies if these people who went through the training got jobs. The service providers were given incentives to kind of provide the employment. So I think initiatives like that can really help people get employment, make the minimum wage, and kind of come out of the poverty, come out of poverty.
And just like you say, like it's a public-private partnership, right?
Yes.
The more a government, local or regional or national, can explain to specific companies where the issues are. Let's say that you go to one of the regions in India and say, here, there's a lot of people who are unemployed in healthcare, for instance. What can we do with all of these people? And then go and make partnerships with hospitality service or hotels, and like do something where you find a purpose for these people. And it's about sharing information.
Yeah.
So creating like closing the gaps between who knows what and where can we use some people.
Got it. Great. Is there any other tips that you have for, I know individuals, there's not much we can do, but I think in our own small way, because even as individuals, a lot of us are employers in a certain sense. So is there any words of encouragement or any advice that you would have?
Well, I think everything helps. And when it comes to no poverty, it is very often in some regions, it's a problem that's bigger for women. So think about who you hire. If you hire people who already have a job, would it be smarter, better to maybe hire someone outside of the job market to give them a purpose? Could you look at maybe people from diverse backgrounds, maybe with disabilities or with who come from different small parts of the society? Can you again create jobs that wasn't there before and use people's skills? And many companies, I can hear that this is a funny thing, that they have taken an intern and afterwards say, yeah, we learned so much from that intern. And you don't even have to pay them very much often. It's a person who comes with a passion or a skill, and they will bring something, either some new energy to your company or just new knowledge that you didn't have before. So I believe that when you create opportunities, just more energy comes into your company, right? And when you look at on the individual level, it is quite hard to tackle the bigger issue of no poverty. But you can probably see that something like local companies nowadays, they are struggling because there's a big competition between them and big entities, global international companies. So if you want to make your local pharmacist survive or your local pizza place, then buy from them, right?
Yeah.
And it also means you know where it comes from. You can go and talk to them. If the pizza wasn't good, go and say, can you change it?
Yeah.
And maybe you can even make partnerships, right? Because you can be a producer of cheese and you can say, I have this specific cheese, maybe your consumers would like to taste it. So I think that there's many ways of doing it, but of course, it's often much easier to be responsible once you have money or funding yourself.
Yeah.
So if you have funding stored in your company somewhere, think about using it responsibly, right? Should you invest in solar panels, or can you create a job instead?
Yeah. I think it could also be to do with, small things of when we're employing people. Could be cleaners coming to your house, and, we're working with companies who probably take majority of the money and barely pay the cleaners. So working with responsible companies whose employees are kept happy. Could even be taxi drivers, right?
Can be,
anyone you're coming in contact with whose services you're taking, making sure they are being paid fairly, and that you're not
and you can also help educate, right? Like I will use the example of my nanny because I've had her for a long time, and I keep asking her how she's storing away money from when she gets old. And she has no clue. So at some point I sat down with her and I said, should we make a budget? Like, should we make a budget where you put money aside for your pension, for your house, for your and she had never thought about that. So like little things like taking half an hour out of your time to say, if you put 30% aside for this or 10% aside for this, create different bank accounts, then you can actually, and she came back and said she'd never thought of it. Because before she just had the money in her hand, right? And she would use them. But now she has somewhere to allocate them that is good for her future.
Right. No, I completely agree. That's a really nice initiative. I hadn't thought about that. So I learned something of this and I'm going to try to do that with my maid. But yeah, that's great. Yeah. So that's thank you so much for all this wisdom and this information, Anne-Marie. There's so much more we can speak about this topic, and I'm sure this half an hour that we spent on it doesn't do justice to the session. What we're going to do with anyone that's viewing the session is we're going to be sharing links for you to get more information about SDG 1. The other thing is that if you have more questions and if there are certain aspects of this SDG that you want to delve into deeper, please write to us and we would be more than happy to schedule a follow-up session to tackle these questions, because the conversation doesn't end here. This is just the starting point. And both myself and Anne-Marie are really passionate about getting this conversation started. So please watch out for the rest of the sessions that are going to be coming. Every fortnight, we're going to release a new episode.
It's SDG week at the Expo in Dubai. So there's going to be a lot of different events, high level and just practical events talking about the different parts of sustainable development. So go there if you have a company or if you have time, and also if you have questions. Really don't keep your questions in, because you're not the only one with these questions. So go and ask and explore.